What's up guys, I'm PawsBuild, and it's been a long time since I made a video covering tips and tricks for Planet Zoo, and a lot has changed in the game since I last made a video like this. So here is my updated top 20 tips and tricks in Planet Zoo. I'm gonna split these tips into 5 tips on making money in the game, 5 tips on educating your guests, and 10 design tips I always think about when I'm making my own zoos. So first up, money. Probably the biggest reason players struggle to keep their zoo's finances under control in Planet Zoo is that they have too many large carnivores early on in the game when they haven't set up the right amount of zoo infrastructure yet. These animals have huge feeding costs which are unsustainable for a small zoo, and are only worth the huge amount of appeal that they bring to your zoo if you can properly monetize the guests that come into the zoo through multiple shops and donations. I'd recommend you stick to a few smaller animals that are more cost effective in their feeding cost to appeal ratio, just while your zoo becomes economically stable, and then introduce the big ticket animals later on when you can support them. My personal favorite habitat animals for this are Nile monitors, as they have low feeding costs but still bring a lot of appeal to your zoo. And exhibit animals have by far the best appeal to feeding cost ratio, as their running costs are only $50. This is made even better by exhibit animals generally being animals that reproduce way faster than habitat animals, and usually with more babies. These additional animals can be sold to other zoos for a healthy profit, which further helps your cash stay in the green when you're starting out. Staff costs are one of your biggest expenses, and having too many staff can cause serious money problems for your zoo, because most of your staff demand hefty annual salary payments. Although I'd be concerned if that was my annual salary after so many years of medical school, and especially with those working hours. Maybe be on the lookout for some unions as well. As a guide of how many staff to get, I'd recommend that at the start of the game you only need one keeper, one vet, and one mechanic. You don't need a security guard or an educator, and only need a caretaker when you add food, drink, and toilet facilities. If you have too many staff in your zoo, remember you can always fire them. Once your zoo expands with more animals, your staff will tell you if their workload is too high and if you need to hire another one to share the workload. But I'd always be cautious with hiring new staff members if your staff aren't fully trained up, as it may be that one person can do the job, it's just that your staff member isn't very good at it. Better trained staff demand slightly higher salaries, but they have significantly improved outputs, which will stop you needing to hire more staff to manage the same workload and cost you much less in the long run. Habitat size and location is also very important for determining how much profit each habitat will make. And as much as I understand we all want to make the habitats as big as possible, large habitats cost your zoo more money in land taxes, and they also greatly reduce guest visibility of the animals, which makes them less likely to donate money to your zoo. If you think your habitat may be too big but you don't want to shrink it, I'd recommend you add some viewing domes. These can be placed in the center of large habitats and greatly improve the guest visibility of your animals. The location of the habitat is also a very important thing to consider when you consider the workload of your staff and keeping your staff numbers low. This is because the closer your habitat gates are to your keeper huts, the less walking your keepers have to do, and the more efficient your keepers will be overall, enabling them to look after more habitats than if they spent half their time unproductively walking between habitats. Power costs are also another significant drain on your zoo's money if you're not careful, and at the start of the game you get one free power resource around the entrance of your zoo. So I'd recommend that you use this as much as possible, and then try to group your other habitats around a few power sources, rather than adding a new power source for each habitat. If you research more power options through the mechanic research in the workshop building, you'll unlock green energy alternatives to the very costly transformer power source. These alternative power sources are more expensive to place initially, but they have no ongoing running costs, which makes them a much cheaper alternative to transformers in the long run. And finally, monetizing your guests properly is crucial to sustaining your zoos economically in Planet Zoo. And there are 3 main ways to do this: entrance tickets, guest facilities, and guest donations. Zoo ticket prices should be raised whenever you add new animals to your zoo, as guests will expect to pay more money based on how appealing your overall zoo zooers. You can check how they feel about ticket prices in the Guest Thoughts tab, so make sure you monitor this and adjust your prices accordingly. Guest facilities are also a huge money-making opportunity in your zoo, and they more than cover the staff costs of the vendors that run them. Ensure you check which facilities the guests are asking for in the Guest Thoughts tab and in the guest heat maps, and put those facilities in where they're lacking. And finally, donation bins should be placed at key viewing areas around your habitats and exhibits where guests group together. One key thing to consider with donations is the better you educate your guests, the more money they'll donate. Which brings us to education. In order to teach your guests about your animals and receive the donations from them that you and your animals desperately need, you need to place education boards around your habitats and exhibits. These boards educate your guests about your animals and can be further supplemented by adding education speakers that are also set to talk about the animal they're next to. The education speakers have an adjustable range in which your guests can hear them, and you need to ensure that these do not overlap, as if they do, they'll interfere with one another and fail to educate your guests effectively. Conservation boards similarly provide education to your guests and can be conveniently placed along walkways between habitats. These provide general education on various animal crises around the world, so they can be placed anywhere in your zoo to improve your general guest education coverage. You can check to see where your education dead zones are in the heat maps, and then plug them with conservation boards for better overall coverage. If your guests have time to sit down and eat a burger, they have time to learn about deforestation. Audio tours are another easy way to provide general education about your animals in the zoo, and these are sold in the guest facilities called information centers. So make sure you have at least one information center in your zoo to enable guests to purchase these audio tours, as well as animal adoption packs and umbrellas. Vet research is crucial to educating your guests about your animals, as when you complete vet research on your animals, you don't just unlock new enrichment and food options, you also unlock better education, which is automatically added to your boards and speakers. Keep in mind that to complete vet research, vets will need to walk between the habitat and the research center. So if you put your research buildings in the middle of nowhere, your research speed will slow down to a snail's pace. One of the most important ways to educate your guests about your animals is through educators. These are dedicated staff members hired through the staff panel alongside your keepers and vets, and they can serve three crucial education functions in your zoos: animal talks, zoo tours, and roaming talks. Animal talks can be created by placing education stands near your habitat and assigning them to the animal inside the habitat. Bonus points for placing them in a spot where your educators can throw food into the habitat. Educators can then be assigned to the education stands and will provide your guests with animal talks about those animals on their scheduled talk time. These timings are important because your educators need time to move around your zoo and take breaks between the talks. I'd recommend you leave 1 to 3 months between each talk, depending on how far apart your talks are. So if you have a talk in January, don't schedule another talk until at least March to give your educator enough time to walk to the second talk. You can also add seating areas to these talks and connect the seating areas to your education stands. Guests will then sit in the seating areas and clear the pathways around your habitat. Otherwise, they will gather around your educator to listen. If you've been careful with your placement of the talk points, your educators will throw food into the habitats during their talks, which is awesome to see. Zoo tours can be assigned by creating a series of stopping points for your educators to lead your guests to. These can either be animal points or breaks in the tour for guests to go to the toilet, grab a snack, or check out your awesome animal hat selection. The tour points need to be connected in the Zoo Tour Manager, and you can choose where you want your tour to start and finish. Finally, roaming talks occur when educators aren't actively doing one of the other two tasks. The educators simply roam around your zoo like a walking encyclopedia, hovering around groups of guests that catch their eye and teaching them about animals they probably didn't even ask about. Now, design is a huge part of Planet Zoo, and I've tried here to condense a few things that I like to do when creating habitats in the game. So here are my top 10 design tips for making zoos in Planet Zoo. The first thing I'd say to anyone who wants to make their habitats more creative in Planet Zoo is to ditch the prefab barriers and make your own barriers for your habitats. This is done by placing null barriers around your habitat and then using either water, terrain tools, rocks, or construction pieces to create your own barriers that will keep your animals safely inside your habitats and still give your guests a great view of them. If you decide to make your own barriers, make sure you check the barrier restrictions of the animals in the Zoopedia before you create them. such as climbing restrictions or height restrictions. And note that water barriers only work for animals that can't swim. Construction pieces have infinite strength, so don't worry if you're trying to contain a pack of lions or a grumpy looking bear, any construction piece will put them in their place. Terrain barriers can be made by sinking the ground at the border of the habitat. You can either make this deep enough that your animals can't scale or jump out of it, or you can then add water to it so they can't climb out. Just make sure that the water isn't filled to the top, or your animals will simply swim out of the habitat. One thing I love to do is create a natural barrier with rocks on at least one side of the habitat, and then make part of the rock barrier into a waterfall feature. This is so easy to do if you have the Aquatic Pack DLC, as they provide beautiful pre-made waterfall pieces, and they can be easily slotted together to create some cool looking waterfalls. However, adding lots of rocks and plants to your zoo can be very time consuming and a bit repetitive. My best time saving tip that will speed this process up is to create a small area of rocks and foliage that you're happy with, and then select all of it, duplicate it with Ctrl D, and place it again in another location. If you check the box random rotation, the game will randomly rotate it for you every time you place an object, so you really won't be able to tell that it's the same area copied and pasted. In this way, you can create a whole forest in a fraction of the time that it would take you to place each tree individually. Another tip is to not only use the guest facilities that are pre-made shops, but experiment with placing restaurants, modular gift shops, and market stalls. In this way, you can embed shops into larger structures or habitats, or make a statement building that gives your zoo a unique look and feel, rather than a generic shop placed on the side of a path. Restaurants can be created by placing the restaurant facility, which will give you a beautiful functioning kitchen. You can choose what they'll be serving in that kitchen and how much it will cost your guests by going into the prices tab. Your guests will enter your restaurant through this facility and will speak to your friendly staff, who will direct them into this black void around the corner. Now, if you've placed some tables and chairs and linked them to your restaurant, your guests will be transported instantly from the black void into the tables and chairs. And the amazing thing about this is the tables and chairs don't have to sit on a path, so you can create multi-story restaurants with guests eating on the top floors without any path connection to them. The color of these tables and chairs can also be customized, which adds a lot of variance into what you can create with them, so go wild. The gift shops are made in much the same way, allowing you to create a modular building of any size that you want and add in whatever you want to sell. This adds so many possibilities for design rather than just the original 3 souvenir shops. Now, if you're interested in building your own custom buildings to house your guest facilities, my best tip is to place the shells of all of the facilities you want first, and then add the doors and the windows to each of them. This will help you visualize the shape of your building, and often sparks imagination for how you could rearrange them to create the shape of the building that you want before you add any further walls or decoration. After this, it's as simple as fleshing out the building by adding external wall and roof pieces, and then going to town on any decorations you want from the construction pieces. I also love adding nature to my buildings, and often opt for building a green roof. You can easily achieve this by laying down a flat roof of whatever material you want to be seen from the inside of the building by your guests, and then add a layer of mulch on top of it from the nature tab. After this, you can go crazy placing whatever plants you want on top of the mulch, and you'll be left with a beautiful green roof to your building that adds so much character. And if plants are the vibe you're going for, why not add indoor gardens to your buildings by doing the same thing on the ground level and then surrounding it in a glass wall exterior? If you want to go even further with your buildings, I'd highly recommend experimenting with unusual shapes and maybe even trying a dome in your zoo, as this can create a great focal point, which is great for entrance buildings, food courts, or even within your habitats as a statement shelter. Domes can create a unique piece of architecture which will stand out in your zoo when you view it from the sky, so I'd recommend that you try creating one. To create a dome, simply place a wall as high as you want it, and then add at least 1 roof piece to it, noting that the number of roof pieces you add will determine how big your overall dome is going to be. Then decorate up that single piece of wall as much as you like. After it's looking like a strange, highly decorated piece of a building, select all of it and duplicate it with Ctrl D. Then position the copy so it joins up with a piece you've already made. And finally, select all of the pieces and hit Ctrl X. This will duplicate all of them, but with the advanced move tool. If you hit X again, you can rotate the new pieces in the same spot. Keep rotating and placing new dome pieces until you've joined up the circle and you're done. If you want some more creative dome ideas, I'd recommend trying some with windows on the side, glass roofing, or even avoid joining the dome roofs up to create a hole in the top of the dome where you can place a beautiful tree. Another tip is to create large pathing areas such as plazas for your guests to sit and eat at, as well as large plaza-style viewing areas that look over your habitats. This can be done by placing a path and clicking the Align to Grid button. You can then click the path you just placed and create a square viewing area. You can extend this over your habitats for better guest visibility of the animals. This technique can also be used to create a perfect square in the center of a large open path area or plaza. If you don't want your viewing areas to be square, you can create circular viewing areas by placing a path and then placing additional paths at right angles to the previous paths until they join up into a circle. So with these tools, I recommend you go out and create some cool plazas in your zoos. My top tip for creating slopes or stairs in Planet Zoo is to make the length and height that you want them to be. Custom slopes and stairs can be created by first placing a path where the start of your slope or stairs is, and then if you hold the control button, you'll notice that you're able to place the next path much more freely. You can find a distance from the original that you're happy with, and then hold down the shift key to raise or lower it. If you place the second path, you will then be able to link it to the original one and create a novel slope or staircase, which can add variety to your zoo or simply help you wrestle the pathing tool if it's misbehaving. I always use this trick in my zoos to create accessible ramps for less abled guests, as the standard slopes in the game seem very steep. So you can use this technique to create much more gradual ramps across your zoos, or whatever you want to do. Another tip is to vary the types of habitats that you offer in your zoo, rather than doing the same thing over and over, and this makes the game way less repetitive and tends to spark more creativity in everything that you do. I'd strongly recommend you to not only have standard habitats and exhibits, but also look to incorporate walk-through habitats, walk-through exhibits, and habitats with huge underwater swimming areas or expansive climbing areas for your animals. These habitats all provide different challenges creatively that keep the game fresh and make your overall zoo look much cooler. The walkthrough habitats are a personal favorite of mine now that guests no longer need to stick to the path, which makes the habitat look much more natural. Now, if you're going to create a huge underwater swimming habitat, one of my favorite ways to show off your animals that love to swim in them is to use a path on one side of the habitat that slopes down below the ground level, and then place a large glass wall on that side of the habitat. This enables your guests to see your animals above the water on one side of the habitat, and then walk around to the other side of your habitat and be able to explore the underwater activities your animals are getting up to. And I wouldn't stop there. If you wanted to create a unique underwater experience for your guests, consider using the circular viewing areas I spoke about earlier and place one inside the habitat before you add any water. Then build around it with glass barriers and add the water back into the habitat. Now your guests can walk into the underwater area and feel like they're swimming with your animals. A big tip when making underwater habitats is to test the depth of the water area to ensure that your underwater feeders are at least 4 meters deep so that they work properly. This can easily be done by carving out the underwater area with the terrain stamp tool, or by using the construction pieces to measure how deep your existing water area is. I'd also do this to ensure that any underwater tunnels or obstacles you've placed in the habitat are at least 4 by 4 meters so that your animals will swim through them. This is the size of a standard wall construction piece, so if you can fit one of these into your tunnel, then your animals will fit through it too. My final tip is possibly my favorite tip of all of them so far, and it's something that I use for every zoo that I build. I'm the type of person who gets analysis paralysis whenever I have too many options to choose from, and always find myself taking longer to choose the movie or TV show that I want to stream than I do actually watching it. Now Planet Zoo is such a huge game with so many animals and so many construction pieces, it can be hard to choose a direction to go with your zoo. I find the thing that sparks the most creativity for me when I'm building in Planet Zoo is to place restrictions on myself, which is what you'll see in my playthroughs on the channel, such as a zoo where everything needs to be eco-friendly and only contains endangered animals, or a zoo where everything is designed around the ethics of the animal's welfare welfare, and all the animals are from the grasslands biome. I find that if I place 1 or 2 restrictions on my zoo, that influences the animals that I have in it and the construction pieces that I use. This makes the decisions around what to make next and how to do it much easier. Let me know in the comments if you have a similar approach to me, and if you have any other tips that might help others out in Planet Zoo. So they're my top 20 tips and tricks for Planet Zoo. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like. It really helps the channel out. And I'll see you in the next one.